This video's for you, chaps magoo. Roll to see who goes first, and it is myself who rolled the highest, so I'm bringing you Lathril, Blade of the Elves. I start off with 3 lands in a basic swamp, Verdant Catacombs and Rogue's Passage, then a little bit more mana with a Mana Dork in Elves of Deep Shadow, some removal in Masked Vandal and Ruthless Winnower, and then hopefully later on I can refill my hand with Shamanic Revelation. It's these guys' first run of Commander, so Raz is bringing you the Leinore precon that I brought for him. And he starts off the game with 4 basics, a Stalwart Pathlighter, Citadel Siege and Ruinous Intrusion. Then after that it is Andy with his Kalitas Traitor of Ghet Vampire Tribal list. He also starts off with 4 basics, a Gatekeeper and Butcher of Malakir, similar removal to my opening hand, and Dark Petition to hopefully use as a sort of demonic tutor later on. Next up it's Coxie bringing his favourite creature from what I dare say is his favourite set of all time, Rafiq of the Many. And his opener's a pretty stacked hand, a couple of basics, Hinterland Harbour and Noble Hierarch for mana, and then it's Silverblade Paladin for some double strike on what will hopefully not be the Sword of Feast and Famine, and worst case scenario we can wipe the board with Supreme Verdict. So now that we've covered the opening hands, let's get to the game. Hope you enjoy it. On turn 1 I play and crack a Verdant Catacombs. I search up a shock land, shocking myself to bring it in untapped so that I can play Elves of Deep Shadow. Then it's just a Plains for Raz, and a Swamp for Andy. Then Coxie plays a Forest into a Mana Dork of his own in Noble Hierarch. Round to turn 2, I drop a Swamp and go for Trailblazer's Boots. Then Raz plays a Forest this time. Andy drops another Swamp. And then Coxie goes for a Plains and makes use of that Mana Dork to generate 3 mana into Silverblade Paladin, pairing it with his Noble Hierarch to give it double strike. Then I start turn 3 with a Rogue's Passage. Then I tap my 3 lands along with the Mana Dork, pinging myself, in order to play Lathril, Blade of the Elves. Next up is a Plains for Raz into Lifecrafter's Bestiary. And Andy plays his 3rd Swamp and passes. Then Coxie plays a Plains into his 2nd Exalted spell, Angelic Benediction. He then attacks me with the Silverblade Paladin, and it is attacking alone, so the 2 Exalted triggers go off, turning that into a 4/4 with double strike. He can tap my Lathril down and get straight through, not that I was going to block with it anyway. So I take a total of 8 and go down to 28 life. Turn 4 now, and I play a Woodland Chasm in tapped, and then play Nadia's Blackblade. And instead of letting bygones be bygones, I turn my commander in sideways towards Coxie for 2 points of commander damage, knocking him down to 38 life and making 2 elf tokens. Raz plays a basic Plains and searches up a Forest with Growth Spasm, making an Eldrazi Spawn token in the process. Andy plays another basic Swamp and then throws down Lashwraith. Coxie plays a Hinterland Harbour as his land for the turn, and then he plays Sword of Feast and Famine, which is particularly scary for me, but it is going to be useful against every opponent he has thanks to the protection from green and black. As if by chance he just so happens to have the mana to equip it to his double striker, he promptly turns it in sideways towards me, so the 4/4 now becomes a 6/6 with double strike thanks to the Exalted, whacks me for 6 twice with the double strike, making me discard 2 cards, and he untaps his lands twice. He doesn't have any instants to cast between the untapped triggers though, and he does choose not to tap any creatures down so as not to make any further enemies. I discard Shaman of the Pack, and Ruthless Winnower, and then it's round to my turn again. Turn 5, and luckily I had a Masked Vandal in my opening hand, and I just discarded some creatures, so I play that out straight away, getting rid of the Sword of Feast and Famine and exiling my own Ruthless Winnower from the graveyard. Then, in an attempt to not have Coxie keep swinging in at me, I turn sideways at Raz this time for 2 commander damage, knocking him down to 38 and generating 2 Elves. I finish the turn off with an Urborg. Raz plays a basic Plains and goes in for Citadel Siege, choosing dragons, meaning that at the beginning of each combat he can tap down a creature. Andy plays his commander Kalitas, And then Coxie starts his turn with an island, and then also goes in for his commander, Rafiq of the Many. And then during combat, Coxie swings in his Silverblade Paladin towards Andy this time. With 3 exalted triggers, that becomes a 5-5 with double strike. Coxie taps down his Germ, and Andy, not wanting to lose his commander straight away, goes down to 30. After combat, Raz realises that he actually doesn't have a choice and has to tap down a creature with the Siege, so just arbitrarily decides to tap down Coxie's Mana Dork. Round to turn 6 now, and my hand has pretty much been decimated by Coxie's Sword of Feast and Famine. Luckily I had a Shamanic Revelation in my opening hand, so I decided to tap that down and draw 8 cards. I do take 1 damage to the Elves of Deep Shadow as well. That draws me into a land in Wirewood Lodge, so I play that. And at the beginning of combat, Raz taps the Lathril with his enchantment. But the Wirewood Lodge allows me to untap that, so that's exactly what I do. Then because Raz decided to target my creature with his Citadel, I decide to turn in towards him for 2 further points of commander damage. At the end of my turn, I discard Arcane Signet to hand size. Raz starts his turn by scrying a card to the bottom with the Bestiary, and then plays a Somberwald Sage, paying green to draw a card. Then he plays a bounce land, bouncing a basic plains back to hand, and passes it over to Andy. Andy drops a swamp, and then plays a Gatekeeper of Malakir, pointing it at Coxie because he doesn't have any tokens in play. Coxie sacrifices his Rafiq, and Andy gets a zombie into play. That ends his turn, and Coxie gets to start his. He draws for the turn and goes straight through to combat. Raz taps down his Noble Hierarch, and the Silverblade Paladin goes straight in towards Andy, which is now a 4-4 with double strike. He taps the Germ with his own enchantment. Andy blocks, throwing his zombie token away immediately. Turn 7 now, and I get down a Lightning Greaves, followed by Elvish Archdruid. I equip Lightning Greaves onto the Elvish Archdruid to give it haste, and that taps for 11 mana, which allows me to cast Beast Whisperer and Aurum Frostfang. I cast the Beast Whisperer first, so I draw a card from the Aurum Frostfang. Then it's not ideal, but I decide to use some of my remaining mana to cast the Wirewood Pride. That puts +12/+12 on my Lathril, making it a 14-15. I use the last of the green mana to untap Elvish Archdruid with the Wirewood Lodge. Raz taps one of my tokens at the beginning of combat. I turn 5 now 2/2 tokens in at Raz, and the Lathril, actually a 15-16 thanks to the Anthem effect from Elvish Archdruid, goes in towards Coxie. Raz takes 10 life, going down to 26, and Coxie casts a Flurry of Wings, creating 6 bird tokens, and blocks my Lathril with 2 thanks to the Menace. I draw 5 cards from the Aurum Frostfang thanks to the tokens that did connect. I then play Swamp for the turn, and put Lightning Greaves back onto the Elvish Archdruid. It taps for 12 mana this time thanks to the Beast Whisperer. I play Throne of the God Pharaoh, and then Leinore Elves, leaving me with 9 mana. I draw with the Beast Whisperer after casting the Leinore Elves. Then go down to 5 mana, casting a Null-Made Shepherd. I draw again with the Beast Whisperer. Then the last spell of the turn is Elderfang Venom. It is noteworthy that death triggers don't work now thanks to Kalitas being in play. I put the Lightning Greaves back on Lathril and go to the end step. Everyone loses 8 life to the throne thanks to me having 8 tapped creatures in play. Raz scries a card to the top at the beginning of his turn, and then casts himself a Kyler, paying green to draw a card with Bestiary. He then plays Stalwart Pathlighter, putting a plus counter on the Kyler. He pays green again to draw. And he throws down a Buried Ruin, and then a Bloodline Keeper. He equips Kalitas with his Lash Wraith, and Raz taps his Gatekeeper, hoping that the Kalitas won't come barreling in towards him. But Andy, not to be manipulated, swings in towards Raz anyhow. Raz chumps with his Eldrazi Spawn, and sacrifices it in response to blocks so that Andy can't gain any life. Unfortunately for me, on Coxie's turn he casts that Supreme Verdict he's been holding on to all game. In response, I use Null-Made Shepherd to blow up Raz's Siege because I'm worried about losing Lightning Greaves at some point. Now there's a really unfortunate miss here. Andy completely forgets triggers from his own Kalitas. 14 non-token creatures die here, so he should have ended up with 14 zombie tokens. We'd usually play this out honestly and point it out to him, but Frankly, all of us forgot as well. This is the first time that we've played a game of Commander together, and it's certainly the first time that we've tried to produce a video like this. Unfortunately, this miss will probably have changed the outcome of the game, so apologies to all of you for that. Hopefully these kinks will get ironed out as we produce more content like this. Anyway, Coxie passes through the turn after that, and it's round to turn 8. I play Command Tower as my land for the turn. I play Lathril and throw the Lightning Greaves onto that straight away. I shove 2 more points of commander damage on Raz, making 2 more elf tokens, and then cast Miara. At the end of the turn, everyone loses 1 life to the throne because I have 1 tapped creature in play. Raz scries to the top at the beginning of the turn, and then plays a fortified village, revealing a plains. He then goes for Enduring Scale Lord and pays green to draw a card. Andy throws out a swamp, and then plays Butcher of Malakir. Coxie makes a basic plains, and then plays Borderland Ranger, searching up a basic forest. Turn 9, and I make Leinore Waste for the turn. I move the Greaves to a token, so that I can put the Trailblazer's Boots onto Lathril, and then put the Greaves back on Lathril. I swing at Coxie with an unblockable 2-power commander, and he goes up to 4 commander in total and 27 life. Again, everyone takes 1 to Throne of the God Pharaoh, thanks to my 1 tapped creature. Raz scries to the bottom this time, then plays Crowson Verge, and taps out into Trostani Summoner, paying a green to draw the card. This gives him a 2/2 white knight token with Vigilance, a 3/3 Centaur, and a 4/4 Rhino with Trample. Andy gets out Thespian Stage, and then throws out an Akroma's Memorial. This is where those zombie tokens would have come in handy. In response, I Assassin's Trophy the Vampire because I'm worried about protection from black. In hindsight, probably should have just gone after the Akroma's Memorial. And that puts a trigger on the stack, so we all have to sacrifice a creature. I sacrifice a token, and pay 1 and 1 life to Miara to draw a card. Everyone also gets drained for 1 by my enchantment. Coxie plays Battle Grace Angel this time, and then throws out a Lightning Greaves of his own and equips. I play out a turn 10 Sol Ring, and then Elvish Dredgelord. I turn 3 tokens in at Andy, and Lathril in towards Coxie, and everyone loses 4 life to the throne at the end of my turn. Raz scries to the top, and then his 4/4 flyer comes swinging in at me, so I have no choice but to take that. And then he throws out an Hour of Reckoning, choosing not to convoke. That successfully lands and blows up all of the non-token creatures, including my Elvish Dreadlord. So that trigger goes on the stack, and all non-elves get -3/-3 until the end of the turn, getting rid of all but 1 of Raz's remaining tokens. I pay 3 mana and 3 life into Miara to draw 3, and everyone is drained for 3 by my enchantment. Andy plays out Vampire Outcast on his turn, and immediately equips it with the Lash Wraith. He swings in at me for 10 and knocks me down to 5, and he gains 10 life. Coxie plays out a Forest and drops Rafiq of the Many. Equipping Lightning Greaves onto that straight away, he swings in towards Andy, tapping down his Vampire. Rafiq becomes a 5/5, so hits Andy for 10 points of commander damage. Over to my turn, I cast Reclamation Sage and deal with that Akroma's Memorial eventually. I then cast Elvish Gary, Skemfar Shadow Sage. When that enters, its trigger goes on the stack to lose everyone a bunch of life. I hold priority and put Elven Ambush on the stack. I make 8 tokens with that, doubling the number of elves I control, and that has all of my opponents lose 16 life. So there we are, another paper game in the bag. Apologies for that missed Kalitas trigger again, like I said at the time, that would have changed the outcome of the game. Everyone was putting a lot of thought into playing our first ever paper game, and then there was the production side of it for me. Hopefully as time goes on with these, we can minimise the amount of mistakes like this that are made. But hopefully you all enjoyed it regardless. Be sure to leave it a thumbs up and subscribe if you did. Please consider donating on Patreon as well. These videos take forever and a day to make. The Magic Online games take a long time, these take even longer. So if you can support with anything at all, then that will be greatly appreciated and make this whole thing worthwhile. Huge thank you to you if you decide to do any of that. I'm tribalkai on the EDH channel. Thank you for watching.